The formal title of my lecture, as you can see, is Urban Grassroots, Civic Leaders, and the Global SDG, or Sustainable Development Goals Agenda. We as ordinary citizens, of course, experience a range of everyday problems in our daily lives, such as getting to work and to school, traveling to the store, buying food, and even breathing the air around us. How we sense problems in our daily lives and organize to respond to them is crucial in getting those problems solved. So is the quality of our leadership and how responsive that leadership is to the problems that real people actually feel. Those of us who live in big cities such as Tokyo and Washington, D.C., where I am normally acting, or New York, London, Paris, or Chicago, have special problems such as constructing and using mass transit, finding green space, and dealing with the complex human environment around us. Yet we also have special strengths and opportunities for problem solving in cities due to their density, the power of proximity, as I call it, which helps us organize and be more creative than we could be by ourselves alone. All of us, and especially those who live in great global cities, are living in an age of truly daunting global problems. There are, of course, the issues of war and peace, war in the Ukraine and the threat of war in the Taiwan Strait or the Korean Peninsula, for example. These grab international headlines and tend to monopolize national government attention. Yet there are also, as we so well know, the less dramatic, but nevertheless extremely important, serious long-term human problems, many with an everyday referent that we continually see before us. Some of the most serious of those problems relate to our slowly changing global environment. At times, of course, we can see the evidence of change rather dramatically in the increasingly violent typhoons, or in the United States, the hurricanes that buffet our shores. We can see evidence of that global climate change in the increasingly heavy floods, such as the one in Pakistan recently, that put nearly 1/3 of the country's cropland underwater. Or we can see this evidence of global change, global climate change, in the droughts that increasingly plague the Sahel and the Sahara areas in Africa. We can also see it, of course, in the forest fires that are more and more common in California and other parts of the world. Sometimes the evidence of change is less dramatic, but still visible from our own personal experiences over time. Some of the plants and animals that we have long known, such as the polar bear in the Arctic, are in danger. Indeed, scientists tell us that 20 to 30% of all of the plants and animals in the world currently face extinction. When I was a student, some years ago, of course, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, the highest peak in Africa, and I can still remember the crunch of the snow in the last 500 meters toward the summit. I saw some pictures of Mount Kilimanjaro recently, and there is no snow at all on this tall peak, the tallest mountain in Africa. I can also remember, as I think some of you also can, the days when the cherry blossom season in Japan, the Sakura Zensen, was many days later than it is today as global warming steadily proceeds. Scientists tell us, indeed, that global warming is steadily proceeding. Statistics tell us that the world has gotten about 1.5 degrees warmer in Celsius since 1880. But the rate of global warming since the early 1980s, that is the last 30 years, has been moving twice as fast as the long-term trend. Indeed, all of the 10 warmest years in global history, as far as we have that recorded, have been since 2010. And the melting of the polar ice caps, which keep the world cool, could well accelerate that pace of global warming still further. The social development goals of the United Nations were established, as many of you know, in September 2015, when the United Nations members agreed to adopt 17 of those SDG goals. There are 169 concrete targets, so it's really quite detailed. And those targets are to be achieved by the year 2030. These targets flowed out of a broad process of global consultation in which over 10 million people from around the world expressed their views, leading to the final agenda. Soon thereafter, after the SDG goals were established, the Paris Climate Agreement, or COP21, setting a target for global warming of less than 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, were set. The global 17 Sustainable Development Goals are presented in the chart that you can see here. The print is a little bit small, and I'm sorry about that. But there are 8 or 9 of these goals, as perhaps you can tell, that do relate to the challenges that we face today in big cities, such as affordable and clean energy, good health and well-being, which of course relates to the air that we breathe and the water that we drink, clean water, and life on land. The clearest of these goals, of these SDG goals, of course, as far as the cities are concerned, is SDG development goal number 11, which you can see on the slide here. It says, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Conventionally, as since the middle of the 17th century, when the Treaty of Westphalia, which ended one of Europe's most destructive wars, was signed, nation states have been the classic unit of sovereignty and political action in the international system, as most of you know. And nation states, of course, have also been the keys to international agreements. The United Nations, when it was created in 1945, for example, was set up as a compact among nation states, and some, namely the permanent members of the Security Council, including China and Russia, were given veto powers, as you know. As we've seen in the Ukraine war, state sovereignty and veto powers have become an important obstacle in many cases, to dealing with global problems. Recently, nation states have recorded disappointing progress, unfortunately, in dealing with sustainable development type human security issues. The Kyoto Protocol, for example, was concluded in 1997 with great hope. I can remember personally, as I was in Kyoto as a junior member of the American delegation while serving as special advisor to our American ambassador to Japan. Our American delegation was led by Vice President Al Gore, who was vice president and then later Nobel Peace Prize recipient for his work on the global warming problem. The Kyoto Protocol did make some important innovations, such as emissions trading. And we had in those days, of course, much hope for more. But the Kyoto Protocol was unfortunately not ratified by many major nations, including, I'm embarrassed to say, even by my own country, the United States, and did not achieve its optimistic emissions targets. It was superseded, as you know, by the Paris Global Climate Agreement achieved at COP21 in Paris in 2015. Yet the world is even behind, around 45% or so in my calculation, behind the important targets that the world set at Paris in 2015, less than a decade ago. After 2015, and especially after 2017, national governments began paying even less attention to long-term environmental challenges and SDG goals than before, in many cases. The United States, for example, pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord in January 2017 and did not rejoin until 4 years later. Nation states, in short, have failed to achieve the progress in SDG goals that many had hoped for. They have had alternate goals, including, of course, some very important ones relating to national security. Other units of society are clearly needed to take the place of nation states with their crowded agendas, or at least to supplement their efforts. I would argue, and I will try to document that argument, that cities should play a larger role. You might ask why it is that cities should be so important with respect to the SDG goals, and especially the one that we are focused on here relating to the environment. First of all, and in some ways most importantly, the problems are there. Cities in the world consume 2/3 of all of the global energy which is consumed on Earth. They also emit 70%, that is 7 out of every 10 particles of CO2 emissions. Cities are also highly vulnerable to the effects of global warming. 90% of the urban areas of the world, for example, are on coastlines. That is to say, 90% of the populations of those areas are on coastlines, where, of course, the rising seas that are created by the melting of the global ice cap are a tremendous problem. We saw this problem, for example, during Hurricane Sandy and frequently in New York City, which got flooded as the seas rose and a major hurricane buffeted New York City. The problems of the global warming are not only the only ones, of course, that cities do face that relate to the SDG goals. Cities, of course, are the basis, the most important location of much disease, including the pandemics like COVID-19, which the world recently suffered from. They also are subject to crime, and also, of course, the inequality of deepening inequality of income in the world, which is also a subject of the SDG goals. So cities potentially, through the efforts of their citizens and their leaders together, can be an important part of change, of addressing the problems that the social development goals are addressed to. I mentioned earlier the second point here, that nations can't easily act. They have other concerns. Nation states, by their nature, are responsible for national security and have to take concern for defense and issues such as that. They have much more complex agendas than cities do. And so cities are better able to focus on problems, especially human security problems, than nation states do. Cities also, point 3 that you will see on our slide, enjoy what Professor Edward Glaser of Harvard University calls the power of proximity. People in cities are close together. That allows them to meet much more easily than would be true if they lived in the countryside. They can communicate more easily. Of course, social media does help us to communicate across long distances, but social media, it can't be used in all circumstances. And of course, the people of the cities also are more familiar with social media than others. So the power of proximity applies very importantly to cities, which helps them to be creative and to generate solutions to a very broad range of problems. A fourth point, as you can see, is that urban leaders and their citizens too are closer to the problems of human security than national leaders are. And also they have less distraction from political, military issues and the range of complicated questions of global diplomacy. Urban leaders, the mayors, the governors that we will be discussing later, they can focus on human security more easily because they have less distraction. Cities are thus, as I stress in my recent book, Global Political Cities, very important as actors in the international system. In fact, we are moving into an era, I would argue, post-Westphalia, where the nation state's role is steadily declining and the role of cities actually is rising because in large part, cities are closer to the problems of the world, the human problems of the world that people care so much apart. The fifth point as to why cities are so important in dealing with SDG problems. Cities also are global, they can be global arenas that have instantaneous communication, particularly with other cities elsewhere in the world, where issues can be debated and solutions found. We see, I think, a clear example of this in 2019 in Tokyo itself, when Governor Koike, just before the G20 summit of nation states that was held in Osaka, convened the C20 conference among global mayors and governors to deal with major global issues. That, of course, got global publicity and generated some concrete proposals for action on the global stage. We have the Singapore Shangri-La Dialogue, for example, which combines nation states and other actors. We have the Davos World Economic Summit, which is also convened in cities. We have the numerous economic forums, which former Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York City has convened, most recently in New York City itself. So cities can become global arenas, and that is to say, arenas that advertise, that emphasize, that dramatize global problems and present them to the world. And we will see more examples of that sort of thing coming up. Number 6, cities are also important increasingly because they are increasingly united and active on global problems. A very good example of this is the so-called C40 organization of global mayors and governors, in which Governor Koike has played a key role at serving as vice chair, working closely with Mayor Anne Hidalgo of Paris and many other important leaders. This organization was founded years ago by former Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York City, who continues to be very active in supporting the role of cities in international affairs and to encouraging their cooperation. And of course, there have been many other global leaders, some of who also served at national level as after their time as mayor, such as Boris Johnson, who is mayor of London, and then Prime Minister of Britain, Mauricio Macri, who is mayor of Buenos Aires and then president of Argentina, and Lee Myung-bak, who is mayor of Seoul and then became president of the Republic of Korea. And so it's quite common for groups such as C40 and the interaction of mayors and governors to create networks that achieve change and promote change, not only at the civic level, but then also at the national level as well. Well, we've been looking at the issue of global cities from a rather abstract point of view, looking across the world and showing a few reasons why cities are so important as both actors and arenas for solving global problems. I think, though, too, it's very important for us to go ahead and to look more concretely at the things that individual cities actually do to achieve major changes in world affairs. And I would like to take here 4 cities and city areas that I think have become particularly important, and to give you some details on the things that leaders in cooperation with grassroots actors have been able to achieve in promoting human security. Those 4 areas and cities, well, 5 actually, are first of all San Francisco, secondly Paris, thirdly Chicago, fourthly and briefly Seoul, and then finally Tokyo itself, where Governor Koike plays both an important global role and also a very creative role as a major innovator in leading Tokyo itself. I might point out that of these 5 cities, 4 of them currently are led by female leaders. In San Francisco, London Breed, who is a Black woman, the first Black woman to serve as the mayor of San Francisco, where she has served since 2018. In Paris, the leader is Anne Hidalgo, who has served since 2014. Like London Breed, she also comes from a distinctive background. She's actually born outside France itself. She is a native of Cadiz in Spain, and is also the first female mayor of Paris. In Chicago, we have Laurie Lightfoot, who has served since 2019 as mayor. She also is a Black woman, and the first Black woman to be elected mayor there. The previous mayor, whom we'll discuss more a bit later, someone that most of you all know, Rahm Emanuel, who served as mayor of Chicago very creatively for 8 years, from 2011 to 2019, and is now the American ambassador to Japan, appointed by President Biden. And then finally, of course, we have Yoriko Koike, also a very distinctive background, who as the first female governor of Tokyo, and also educated overseas at the American in Cairo. And Governor Koike has been serving since 2016 as very creatively as governor of Tokyo. In Seoul, there have also been some very creative mayors, and as I said earlier, the one of the major former mayors of Seoul, Lee Myung-bak, became later president of Korea. The first area which I would like to look at is San Francisco, and I say area rather than simply city, because something that I think contributes very importantly to the success of the San Francisco Bay Area is the fact that it has several municipalities that are close together and actually work together in rather dynamic fashion. One of the important things to ask ourselves, I think, is why San Francisco? Why is it that a place so far out on the American West Coast, it's 3,000 miles, 4,000 kilometers plus from our capital of Washington, D.C., why it is such an important center of innovation and urban dynamism on really a global scale. There are four special reasons that I think we can point to for explaining why San Francisco has been so dynamic as a urban area. First of all, is the history. It's an area of individualists ever since the gold rush of 1849. It has a tremendously varied history of creative dissent. First of all, social policies, where it protested against the lack of creative policies on employment and economic change during the Depression of the 1930s. This free speech movement of the 1960s was born in San Francisco. San Francisco also was important in leading and encouraging student dissent around the world in the 1960s. It was important in opposition to the Vietnam War, and many of the NGOs that later became important in other areas were born during that struggle. San Francisco has been a leader on the global environmental movement as well. Earth Day, for example, that we continue to celebrate to this day, was born in San Francisco. A third important reason, apart from its individualism and its history of dissent, is the vitality of NGOs, which of course is related to this history. In addition, decentralized government. I mentioned San Francisco, but there's also South San Francisco and Palo Alto and the many cities of Silicon Valley, such as Cupertino and San Jose. And many of these have been very creative. There's a sort of competitive cluster, as the strategist Michael Porter put it, that helps to encourage creativity and innovation in the San Francisco Bay Area. Finally, I don't think we can ignore the importance of economic support. Silicon Valley is a hotbed of innovation in the United States, and many entrepreneurs who have become wealthy through founding Apple Computer and Facebook and Uber and many of the other creative, dynamic new companies of the United States have also supported innovation in the social areas as well. Let me give you a few examples, which you can see on the chart here, of the kind of innovation, environmental innovations that this creative environment in the San Francisco Bay Area has created. First of all, plastic bags. San Francisco passed the first plastic bag ban in the United States, and then it updated that ban to provide a 10-cent deposit on all carryout bags in 2012. Secondly, composting. In 2009, San Francisco passed an ordinance requiring residents to sort garbage into 3 categories: recycling, compost, and trash. It also insisted that fines be extracted as a sanction to punish incorrect sorting. This was the first de facto composting legislation in the United States, which of course has had a positive environmental impact. Thirdly, bottled water. In 2014, San Francisco banned the sale and distribution of bottled waters on city property. It became, thus, the first major American urban area to ban single-use plastic water bottles. And then finally, renewable energy. In 2016, San Francisco passed a law requiring new buildings to have solar panels installed on their roofs. I could go on, but you can see the creativity that San Francisco has shown in terms of SDG policy goals. Explaining Bay Area globalism and policy innovation, of course, is important. It's in a way rather paradoxical that a small city on the far side of the American continent could have such a major global impact. To recapitulate a couple of the things I mentioned, history is important. Social structure, the NGOs that were born out of the various struggles of the past have helped to encourage innovation. Political structure, next slide. As you can see here, the rather decentralized structure of the area of the Bay Area around the San Francisco Bay, the San Francisco itself, the peninsula, South Bay, East Bay, North Bay, and then the many little cities, many of which have very innovative policies and borrow from each other. Finally, of course, the role of economics, the fact that Silicon Valley and its creative entrepreneurs and also wealthy entrepreneurs are so close by. I mentioned San Francisco as one very creative area. Another important one, which also, especially since the Paris Accords of 2015, have become increasingly important globally, is Paris, which also, of course, following Tokyo, will be the site of the next Olympic Games in 2024. Now, before we go into what has been done in Paris, and I'm sure you will see that Mayor Hidalgo has been very creative as a leader, as also Governor Koike, a close associate of hers in Tokyo, has been as well. But it's also important to remember her background. She is someone who is detached from the long-standing power structure of Paris. The first elected mayor of Paris, who also, I think it's fair to say, did achieve much, Jacques Chirac, who later became president of France, was very close to the bureaucracy and the power structure of Paris. But the one who has really been creative in the environmental area, particularly, has been Mayor Hidalgo. She became mayor in 2014, and as we will see in a moment, achieved a number of very creative steps. I think it's important to remember she was distinctive. She was, in some ways, an outsider. She was foreign born. she was a Spaniard rather than from France, although, of course, the two countries are very close, and she knew Paris well. She was an activist. She knew the NGO community well. She was a woman. She was a feminist leader who was willing to strike out in new ways. And all of those things, I think, have helped her to have become an important innovator on the global scene. Let me just go over a few of the initiatives that Mayor Hidalgo has undertaken in her beautiful city that will be hosting the Olympics in just a little more than a year. One of the most interesting to me is the Paris Breathes initiative, which came out interestingly and very appropriately in September 2021, I'm sorry, just as COVID was ending. It involves car-free Sundays from 11 in the morning until 6 p.m. when only bicycles, rollerblades, skateboards, and pedestrians, of course, can use the streets in the middle of Paris. The only way for people to get to the heart of town also is via buses and taxis. Private autos can't take you downtown to enjoy the beauty of downtown Paris during those Sundays. Some of the other initiatives that Mayor Hidalgo has undertaken are bike sharing, which is also, of course, quite common. New York City, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, for example, also extensively popularized bike sharing in New York City, and Hidalgo does that in Paris. 24-hour subway service, which encourages people to drive less, reduces transportation jams, and also, of course, helps the environment. A ban on parking in many areas of Paris, pedestrian walkways, and making the Seine River, which had been for a long time swimmable. And she plans to do that by 2024, when the Olympics are going to be held. The next city that I would like to mention is Chicago, and particularly to highlight the rather important initiatives that were made by the former mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who is now serving very effectively as the U.S. ambassador to Japan. Chicago is the #3 city in the United States. It has a population of almost 9 million as the metropolitan area. So, of course, it's significantly smaller than Tokyo, but still, it's quite large. And it's been called a city in a garden. It has lots of water. Naturally, Lake Michigan, of course, is close by. The Chicago River runs through it, as the Seine River also does through Paris. And it has some large parks from the past, like the Grant Park and the Millennium Park. But there's been some very important enhancements building on those natural strengths of Chicago that were undertaken under Mayor Emanuel, whom I spoke to not long ago. And one thing that really struck me was his great interest in water and the importance of its role, as he pointed out, in cities. I think that's clear, as we'll see in a moment, from some of the things that he did as mayor. Mayor and now Ambassador Emmanuel also has a great interest in design, in making the use of space as environmentally pleasing as possible. My impression is also that he has a great interest in transport, and also especially as is well reported in the media, in the use of trains, which can be, of course, energy efficient and promoting SDG goals because of how they reduce the amount of automobile traffic. Ambassador Emmanuel achieved, while he was Chicago's mayor between 2011 and 19, a number of very important projects. First of all, the Chicago River Walk, which is, you can see right here. It's almost 2 kilometers long, right through the middle of Chicago, leading down to the waterfront. A second thing, park projects. The park district added about 1,000 acres of green space and improved or built almost 400 playgrounds while he was serving as mayor. Thirdly, the array of things. That doesn't sound clear, I know, but what this is an array of sensor devices using digital monitoring to improve the transport, the energy efficiency, the air quality, and also to restrain crime across the city. So Mayor Emanuel worked hard at digitalization and then using digitalization to help achieve SDG goals. Finally, of course, he did a $8.5 billion expansion of O'Hare International Airport, which is continuing right now. I passed through there frequently just only a few days ago. And it's really the best way of getting between Washington and Tokyo, and is being rapidly globalized and also made more energy efficient. Tokyo, of course, you all with Tokyo Metropolitan University are so well versed on Tokyo itself. And I won't take as much time with respect to Tokyo except to accent what I think is the very, very important recent transformation of Tokyo under Governor Koike, who has led Tokyo since 2016. As you know, Governor Koike served earlier in her career as Minister of the Environment from 2003 to 2006. Also interestingly, she served as Minister of Defense and as the Prime Minister's first national security advisor. So she has a very broad and versatile career. She was elected as vice chair of the C40 steering committee, so she's played an important role in encouraging global cooperation on the environment. She insisted on environmental and economic efforts that can work together to achieve the sustainable development of Japan. One of the most important areas, and of course this is because Japan is, Tokyo is such an important financial center, she has pioneered in what is known globally as green finance, activities such as green finance subsidies for encouraging innovative foreign firms to enter into the Tokyo financial market, for example. Green finance through the development of so-called green bonds, is providing over $7 billion of environmental finance, including for things such as funding hydrogen stations, where, of course, Tokyo is moving rapidly, and Japan in general is leading the world. Governor Koike also launched a sustainable energy fund and has been encouraging public-private sector partnerships through the FinCity Tokyo program and other activities. We have talked about a broad range of issues today, focusing particularly on why cities are a key to achieving the social development, the sustainable development goals that the United Nations has set, and which are so important to progress on human security issues. Nations, as we have pointed out, find it difficult to act, partly, of course, because of the substantial concerns that they have for national security. But cities also have many, many strengths that that are important in promoting human security. In particular, they have the power of proximity. The fact, which of course it can also be a challenge, but the fact that people are located close together, that they are able to communicate in communities, such as Tokyo Metropolitan University, in which you were involved. They have the ability to communicate and discuss and think creatively about solutions for the future. They also have developed, many of them, NGOs and citizen action groups, which, as we saw in the case of San Francisco, Paris, and elsewhere, are also important in promoting human security. Thirdly, another major conclusion, of course, is that many cities elsewhere in the world, not simply in Washington, D.C. or in Tokyo, also have creative ideas, and it is very possible to learn from one another, particularly in this era of communication, social media, when it is much easier than it has been in the past to communicate across borders. Fourth of all, and I think this is very important to stress, Tokyo is dynamically cooperating internationally. Governor Koike, as I pointed out, in 2019, she convened the C20 grouping of global mayors. She participates very actively in the C40 organization. She dialogued with London and Paris and other cities with respect to preparations for the Olympics. She's developed many creative ideas and is a key part of this global network of cities, which is becoming increasingly important. Even though we have creative governors and mayors of the world, such as Governor Koike and Mayor Hidalgo in Paris, and Mayor Bloomberg, former Mayor Bloomberg, and former mayor and now Ambassador Rahm Emanuel. Clearly, even more global cooperation is needed. As I think is symbolized in the case of Ambassador Emanuel, and of course, there are other urban leaders who also have played major global roles. such as Mayor Bloomberg, such as Mayor and then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, such as Mayor and then President Lee Myung-bak. There's even more need for cooperation at a variety of levels. The hour is late. The social development goals are important. And much has been done, but yet much still needs to be done. It's a real pleasure talking with you. I look forward to my next visit to Tokyo and hopefully to meeting with you and continuing this dialogue. Thank you very much. ありがとうございました。これからよろしくお願いいたします。